Okay, very good. So gamification, as I was saying, is super well kind of covered and documented. Um, it's been around since 20, well, 2012, there are already thought pieces and stuff, but 2015, it was trending big time. And if you start Googling best gamification examples or something, you find examples right back to 2014 and examples from this year, like side by side. Google doesn't, you have to go in and specify that you want recent examples. And they all kind of look the same because they've been basically doing the same thing. That's interesting. Nothing really significant has happened. So I think there's been a sort of curve of this hype of gamification, and then things have just kind of plateaued. There was a Wired magazine article on gamification recently, and it kind of spoke about, it said basically that scientists or research now knows what is good gamification and what isn't, how to use it right. And that's where we are. And well, that's the state of the field. But I think it's really, really powerful. And we're kind of right at the heart of behavior change, these few classes here, because all that we did before this was all the foundations. If you didn't have those, if you didn't understand these things like belief or cognitive dissonance or persuasion, the theoretical part, we wouldn't have the language to work on these things. But now we are getting into the design part itself. And I think gamification is right at the very core, even though it sounds so, it sounds a little like, really? Are you telling me about this 10-year-old trend and that is important? I kid you not. I think it's really important. We'll see why. So today we'll define it first, what it is. Then we'll try to get into the psychology of what is called tasks. We look at a couple of gamification strategies. We look at a couple of important theories, and we'll end with some frameworks. And we'll try to do all this watching some videos and looking at a few examples as possible. Looking at as many examples as possible. We're doing all the modules today. We haven't had homework, and we definitely have time for a little discussion or even quiz type stuff, I guess, but it's pretty packed. Let's get into definitions. For that, we'll watch a video. Let's see what happens when you basically, like, what is the internet's idea of what is gamification, right? And let's watch one of the most, like, the video that basically comes up on YouTube, and it has lots of likes, lots of positive comments. It's done very well. There is nothing like fundamentally wrong with it, but let's see what this video kind of says. Give me some volume. I think Zoom is really messing with my internet connection. Wow, this is going to take a long time.
Over the last few years, there's been a trend with gamification to add points, badges, levels, or leaderboards as a way to gamify a product. This has become known as the gamification blueprint, and it relies heavily on rewards and competition to motivate players. These elements are fairly easy to add to existing systems. You simply need a way of identifying a particular behavior that you want to encourage, and then you can reward users when they complete it with points or a badge. However, if we're focusing too much on rewards to gamify our systems, then we may run into some trouble. This is because there is a lot more to good gamification than just points, badges, and leaderboards. When we focus on just using rewards to encourage users, we're relying on using extrinsic motivation. We're extrinsically motivated when we perform an activity in order to attain a desired outcome or to avoid a negative one. Think carrot and stick. This kind of motivation can work incredibly well to motivate us in some contexts. However, research suggests that the value of rewards diminish over time. So a bigger and bigger reward is needed to keep us motivated. Research also suggests that once the reward is removed, we're less inclined to
That's really weird because I think the video, like, yeah, the video is far ahead of the audio, if I'm not mistaken. In any case, I think this focus on rewards is something that kind of sticks out usually, and this whole focus on, so he's kind of saying two things there, like contradictory. He's saying it's a simple technique, it's easy to do, you do it by adding points, badges, and leaderboards. And then he says, but those by themselves will not do. You need intrinsic motivation. So there's this inherent kind of lack of clarity in articles online, in the books online, anywhere, especially from these kind of, do-it-yourself type, coaches or guys marketing it, or agencies and stuff. They just say, well, add points, badges, leaderboards, create competition, but you need intrinsic motivation. And all of them say you need intrinsic motivation. But what's the connection between all this? Like, how do these things work together? And that's kind of where that's the depth that we want to go into. That's the unexplored part that we want to go into. So the so-called gamification blueprint, which is generally recognized in the industry, is to add points, badges, leaderboards, and people get goals, and therefore they're done. Yay! But if you look at one of the most important books from 2015 called Actionable Gamification, the whole subtitle of the book is Beyond Points, Badges, and Leaderboards. And this is a book that I would recommend as kind of like a foundational book in gamification. And the whole point is to go beyond those points, badges, and leaderboards, or to actually use them in a very sensible way. So we need to be very clear about what gamification is when we use that word. It is not game design, right? There are people, in fact, in that video, there are points in the video where he starts referring to games. He talks interchangeably between games and gamified experiences. And I think even though they both share similar characteristics, it's very important to distinguish when you're talking about one and the other, because they're fundamentally very different activities. So what is gamification? You basically make unenjoyable behaviors, which we shall call tasks. You make them enjoyable using game principles and mechanics. You take from game principles and mechanics and make these unenjoyable tasks into enjoyable behaviors. So the key words here are tasks. You're trying to turn them into enjoyability, and you're trying to use game mechanics, game principles, game methods, and tricks to do it. So you're basically taking unenjoyable behaviors, which are intrinsically not fun, and you're turning it into all these things. You want to make it stimulating, you want to make it exciting, you want to make it engaging, fun, cool, and so on, right? So these are some typical tasks. Doing homework, probably going for a run, depends on the context, depends on the person. Eating like a very lean diet, right? And the question is, how do you make these enjoyable? But to do that, we'd first have to get into the psychology of tasks itself. What is a task? So why are tasks perceived as difficult? Why are they perceived as tedious? Why are they perceived as hard? Why do we experience this feeling of difficulty? So first and foremost, tasks, they don't happen. Tasks don't happen in the moment, right? They happen over a period of time. Some could happen like in a span of time, which is like a run. Some could happen every day for over a period of time, like doing homework, or having a diet is across period of calendar time. So they're complex, they involve intertemporality, as we saw before, but they're also very much a function of time, or they are situated in time. So the main dissonance that happens when you're about to do a task or doing a task is that basically you experience this friction between the knowledge that this is important, but the other knowledge that you don't have any control, or the experience that you don't have any control. Remember that you would never do anything that is boring, but it's not important. The whole point why you are even considering doing this is because it's important for some reason. It could be sweeping the house, it could be walking the dog, it could be, like in this case, doing your taxes. It could be anything. But this is the key conflict going on there. This is important and I have no control, right? And that control part, of course, accesses your need for agency. The lack of control that you experience, it undermines your agency. So these are a couple of beliefs that are kind of really critical to our feeling of agency and autonomy from psychology. One is something called self-efficacy, and the other is called locus of control. They're both very foundational, primary principles that have been studied quite extensively, and there's a clear literature on them. Self-efficacy basically is the belief that I can control my own behavior. It's something that it's a fundamental need, right? And locus of control is the belief that I, and not the external world or external forces, control the outcome of life events. Now, whenever these two are challenged, or one of them is challenged, or both are challenged, you have a severe attack, a severe challenge to your sense of autonomy and your sense of agency. For example, taxes do that all the time, right? It's super important, but you really can't control it beyond a point. You have to do it within a deadline. You have to do it within a certain format. You have to provide certain details. You can't skip those details. You have to go to certain amounts of effort. You can't compromise. So there's clear issues with self-efficacy there. Most things connected with the government undermine your self-efficacy, and that's one of the key cases for anarchism as a political standpoint. Is that it undermines people's self-efficacy, and it also undermines their locus of control. So government is fundamentally a problem, is what anarchists would say, basically. So locus of control is the other concept. I, as opposed to external forces, control the outcome of life events. Sorry, not when it comes to your taxes. Like the famous saying goes, only two things are certain: death and taxes, right? So definitely you do not control this life, the outcome of this life event. It's controlled externally to you. So tasks are basically a struggle between your need for agency, your need for control, your need for those sub needs, self-efficacy, locus of control, and the fact that that all of that is autonomy. There is a struggle between your need for autonomy, not your need for control, but your need to be in control, and the fact that you're being controlled from the outside, right? This is the main struggle, whether you need to clean, whether you need to shop, whatever. And here we will get into a little bit of theory, right? Basically, what I've been talking about is something called the two forms of motivation, which comes to us from self-determination theory, which I will go into later. But basically, this is Amy Butcher's book, Engaged. And like I said, when it comes to, a couple of classes before, we had discussed this book, a previous class as well. It's a good book. It's quite like, there's a lot in there, goes all over the place. And I definitely recommend buying it because it's got a lot of good stuff. Fundamental motivation, the fundamental motivation model she's talking about isn't that compelling, but the way she's illustrated this is, I think, one of the key innovations or It's one of the really good parts of this book, which is that motivation is on this sort of axis, a spectrum from being controlled to autonomous, right? On one end of this, you have your A motivated, I have no desire to do this. Then you have external motivation. Someone told me I have to do this, or there's an external force. The locus of control is outside. Introjected, I've internalized the nagging, better do this. So as someone who does their taxes on time, as I am starting to be. Identified, doing this will help me achieve goals I really value. So you're starting to connect your own self-worth, your own well-being with this activity. And then you're getting, as you go further towards intrinsic motivation types, it becomes integrated and becomes intrinsic. Doing this is part of who I am, very close to my identity, and then pure joy from doing stuff. I love doing this, it feels great, right? Very intrinsic. So this is the kind of controlled and autonomous scale of motivation. And really, when the internet gurus and Medium writers and YouTubers say you need intrinsic motivation, they're talking about something very, very complex, very, very difficult, very time consuming. Of course it's possible, but it's real behavior design work, because you're basically saying you want to take something that is fundamentally externally extrinsic in terms of motivation, it's a controlled form of motivation, and turn it into something that's autonomous and that's intrinsic through the process of gamification. And if you think about it, who knows, there might be all kinds of really terrible ways to do it. Maybe propaganda is one way to do it, right? Maybe these authoritarian regimes, they actually take people's autonomy away, but make them believe that they are, I don't know, like citizens of the state or whatever, and make them do all kinds of things, follow certain patterns of behavior because they have internalized it, they've integrated it, and they believe they're doing it for the motherland or the fatherland or whatever, right? So gamification may not be the only way to move people in this direction, but certainly this is what gamification is trying to do, because games and game-like behavior is intrinsically rewarding. It's intrinsically fun. People do it for the joy of doing it, whereas paying taxes is not. But could you make it that way? Possible. Takes work, but it's possible. So that's our behavior change path. Okay, let's look at what it's like to pay your taxes online.
Hey there, I'm Melissa Whaley, and right now I'm going to show you very quickly how to pay taxes online with the IRS. So this will be federal page. You're going to see a few very simple options up at the top. This one says pay. Let's go there. Okay, so we want to make a payment on our taxes. Now, I always recommend to use direct pay. The reason we want to use direct pay is because it's going to come out of your checking account and there's not going to be any fees. If you really can't afford to take it directly out of your bank account and you need to put it on a credit card, you can choose this option. But for today, I'm going to show you how to use direct pay. All right, now it's going to explain to you a little bit more about what direct pay is. Again, these are payments for sole proprietors or individual taxes. So this is not going to apply if you are a incorporated business, which means you file your taxes as a partnership, an S Corp, or a C.
Right. So I made my point. Obviously, my reason to do this was not to show you how to pay your taxes, but just to show you how annoyingly crappy this whole life experience is when Right from the first second, it's like your bank account, your credit card, choosing between them, direct pay. What on earth does that mean? Am I a sole proprietor? Who on earth? What's going on? This is taxation anywhere in the world. Very system two. The system one is jumping all over the place. It's trying to understand, like, the only cue you have there is that she looks reliable and nice and friendly. So you trust that hopefully she's going to lead me down this mess to some sort of sanity. There's nothing else, no other emotional cue for your system one to rely on. Your system two is calculating the F out of the entire situation and trying to see what it can do and hope it gets this right. Of course, if you keep repeating that process, you will get eventually to a point of mastery and you'll be able to do it more effortlessly. But so if you look at this beautiful map here, I have no desire to do this. Someone told me I'm doing this. I've internalized the nagging. The only thing that's keeping me going is doing this will help me achieve goals I really value, right? I really, really value. I do not want to be sent a bill from the government. I do not want to go to jail, etc., etc. So very much here, very controlled, extremely controlled form of motivation is driving me forward in this activity. On the other hand, let's look at these guys. I don't know why I didn't embed these videos. Oh, it's here. Come on. Story of love and how it got wild. Feed me until I'm done. Yeah, so like that's hard to stop, right? On the other hand, so that's how much difference there is between these two forms. Like that song is still ringing in my head. We could just drop everything and totally just go there and be there now, right? So that's how much difference there is between these two little boxes here, And when you're trying to gamify something, you're actually trying to take something like that look like that up here, and you're trying to turn it into that. That's the theory, right? So it's a big leap. And just throwing in a few points, badges, and leaderboards, it's not going to cut it, right? So I just wanted to put a few more pictures of intrinsically motivating activities. Intrinsically motivating behaviors are tremendously enjoyable just for the joy of doing them. They're not goal-oriented. You do get outcomes from them, but it's very autonomous. It's the psychology of joy, which is very complex. Why do humans experience joy? You're spending resources, you're burning energy, you're vulnerable when you're happy, you're less aware of threats. From a evolutionary perspective, it doesn't make any sense to be dancing around when something can come and grab you. There's no reason why we do these things, but yet this is the stuff of life. This is what it all really comes down to. All the rest comes down to this, right? And that's intrinsic motivation. You're just driven. So when you're looking for, you're trying to understand if a behavior is autonomous or not, try to see if adding points, badges, and leaderboards make any difference at all. That's a quick test for you to check if something will help from being gamified. Just a little thumb rule that I came up with. Okay, great. So the big gamification challenge is, how do we take something that looks like this and turn it into that, right? Any questions so far? Or comments? All right, just stop me if you need. So in order to go from the extrinsic to the intrinsic, there are at least two gamification strategies we can learn from game design. And they go as follows. We looked at the psychology of tasks. The task is an annoying thing because you have to do it, but you do not have any control. You do not have any say in the matter. You don't have much choice or autonomy. For example, this task, you have to go for a run. It's a journey. I mean, it takes time, and it's probably going to be uncomfortable, but you know you got to do it. So one key strategy we can get from games by applying the game frame to the situation is that you create a destination, right? And very specifically, the idea of a reward is very core, which is a fixed point. And the other key game frame is to actually turn the task into a journey. And that's really about it. You just have these two key strategies, which are gamification strategies. Everything else comes as a subset of these two. One more time. Create a destination with clear rewards attached to it. It's not just a place to go to, but there are clear rewards to be had there. And turn the path itself to that destination, reframe it from being a task to being a journey, because journeys are exciting. So, and here we get into something that's a little bit more what you read traditionally about gamification. Create explicit and enjoyable rewards which support user goals, right? So these rewards could be points, badges, leaderboards, other kinds of rewards, and a reward implies competition. And the key thing to remember about rewards is that they need to support user goals. What was the goal here? In this case, completing my taxes. It's a very kind of a push behavior. I'm avoiding the inconvenience, I'm avoiding the discomfort of not paying, of not defaulting on my taxes or being fined. And that's the key user goal here. And these rewards support that. I'm just talking theoretically here. So for example, what could some rewards be like? We looked at those tasks earlier, task of doing a homework. We basically say, well, if you do your homework, you get to eat some cookies. If you run consecutively for 5 days, get some points, you might win a prize, right? Clear reward. If you do your diet consistently, I'm sorry, the third example was while doing your diet, because it's so boring and it's so task-like, we tend to pair it with more fun activities like watching Netflix or watching something enjoyable. That's why a lot of the time people actually eat and watch, because it doubles the hedonic value of the experience. Especially that's why when you're really tired, you're like, let's just smash the hedonism in now, and let's get like both pleasurable food and watch something pleasurable. So it's like all your senses are just gorging at the same time. But otherwise, if you're just eating something boring, then you probably want to distract yourself with or be engaged with another reward. So basically this behavioral pattern is called reward substitution. It's also a good gamification technique in the real world, right? You hear it you hear it discussed across behavioral economics. Dan Ariely, for example, he talks about it a lot in his intro to many talks, where he says, he had to take these really painful medications, but he did that by borrowing a movie. He would put on the movie, he would take the medication, put on the movie. So when the side effects kicked in for a few hours, he would be totally in the zone watching the movie. And that way he was able to take his medications for a long period of time when others were not able to. So this is the phenomena of reward substitution. What does it do? Reward substitution, basically, it shifts momentarily, only for that period of time. It shifts the user's focus and attention. Your focus is not anymore here on this boring, horrible thing. It's on one of these things, which are more desirable. So for example, here, the runner is not looking at, in their mind, the runner isn't looking at the road, the runner isn't thinking of the heat. They're experiencing this goal psychologically. And when you actually, I think I'll use my keys because this is showing the markers there. But yeah, when you focus on something, then the psychological experience is, it's more immediate, it's closer, right? And that's basically what reward substitution does. It's all about what you put into the focus of the user. And so these other things, the unpleasant things, tend to get just a bit more, like they tend to recede into the background a bit more. And all kinds of interesting things start to happen. This is from Cogload again, something called the goal gradient effect. Our efforts increase as we move closer towards the goal. A 10-space coffee card pre-stamped twice will be completed faster than an 8 with no pre-stamps. That's crazy, because basically a 10-space coffee card, which has two spaces pre-stamped, basically gives you 8 open spots for new stamps, and an 8 a card that has 8 pre-stamps, but none of them, sorry, 8 stamps, but none of them pre-stamps, also gives you 8 places to get stamped. So they're both equal, but the perception of the one that is slightly filled in is that, wow, it kind of gives people that push, it gives users that push to move further, move faster towards the goal. So I think one of the most well-documented and most actually successful rewards programs, if anyone say gamification doesn't work, then they should look at this case, because it most certainly does when it's done right. Recently, there's been some changes to it and there's been some controversy and so on. But I think it's interesting to watch this video. Yeah.
Bucks, you love your tall double shot skinny latte and the little surprises that come with it. With the new My Starbucks Rewards, we're rewarding you with more of the things that make you smile. First, you need a Starbucks card. Simply pick one up and register it online. Each time you use it to pay at Starbucks, you'll earn stars. Pay with your card, collect more stars, and redeem great rewards like your favorite drinks on the house, a slice of cake on your birthday, upsize upgrades, and more of what makes you happy. And if you ever forget your wallet, don't worry. You can still buy a drink, earn stars, and check them on the go. So go on. Your journey to all things bright and beautiful begins here. Welcome to Starbucks.
This is one of those old cases, I think. This video is from many years ago, 2014, see? That was the heyday of gamification in some ways. So, yeah, it definitely works. It has driven Starbucks sales and loyalty basically massively up. And it kind of puts, there's interesting research that talks about loyalty and purchase behavior. So this one says that the more we spend, the more we feel that some random reward will be likely. Of course, these kinds of research are from probably specific studies done in specific cultures. You can't just universally think that they universally apply, but it is nevertheless an idea that the more consumers invest in your brand, the money they incorrectly believe that they'll win entirely random promotions over less loyal customers. That's kind of crazy. And I think these kinds of feelings, they grow with more spontaneous spending and with more loyalty to a brand. And of course, reward programs are now really all across businesses, all kinds of businesses. And I think we could study reward programs actually quite a bit. It's a whole area by itself. I just read something about Amazon introducing a reward program inside their workforce in their warehouses. And I've not read that fully yet, but I posted that article in Slack. And I think that's really interesting to see this intersection between reward programs and work and the gig economy, stuff like that. So let's not forget one thing when it comes to these rewards and stuff, which is that gamification would not work without the perceived value of the goal itself. The reward is not the goal. The goal is what got me started doing the behavior, which is in this case, drinking coffee. But the points and all of those little things that the program gives me, stars, which become more stars, which can be redeemed, all of those are rewards. Those by themselves wouldn't work if I did not have a motivation towards the goal in the first place, which is good coffee. So let's say the quality of the coffee abruptly dropped, or they were higher quality, just much better quality options in the same neighborhood at the same price or even a slightly higher price. I'm sure people would be contemplating switching. So rewards in the gamification context are those things which drive your behavior towards the goal, but they are not a substitution for the goal itself. Your goal still needs to be designed clearly and well. So don't confuse these two. And this is what typically starts to happen, because if you look at this screen right here, some of these are actually on the right. Some of these are actually clear rewards. But that thing down there, that could become a goal in itself, because your rewards can be of two types. You can have symbolic rewards, which are just merely symbols. But then you can have what you think are rewards, but they could become goals in themselves. For example, if you buy 3 Starbucks, you get a large chocolate muffin. That's a very different kind of a reward compared to you buy 3 Starbucks and you get 10 stars. Those 10 stars are purely symbolic. Yes, you can brag about them, but you can't drink them, you can't eat them, and they're a form of currency. And of course, you want them, but you want them because they support your final goal. But when you introduce, say, a chocolate muffin or something that is consumable by itself, whether it's in a game context or whatever, you start messing with the user's head because they're like, they don't understand this is going on, but then they themselves don't know exactly why they are chasing or why they're doing that behavior. So it's very important to distinguish between goals and rewards. And within rewards, you want to be very clear if you're offering symbolic rewards or if you're offering so-called real rewards. I couldn't think of a better word for real, but I would also call it a goal or like a consumable reward. So you want to keep users, this is very important, doing this will help me achieve goals I really value. That identification needs to remain. I'm not sure how much further down we can go here, but let's see. I'm pretty sure that this is very important to maintain, this identification with the goal. And the reward is helping me get there, okay? Great, so this is a couple of examples that came up in that Wired article, which I thought were really interesting. This was a field study, an experiment done on Wikipedia. And they basically gave a bunch of, Wikipedia's, its entire editor base is, they're all voluntary. You don't get paid to do it, and that's incredible. There's also the phenomenon that a small percentage of Wikipedia's editors do a large percentage of the editing. They actually do editing across a wide variety of topics, actually, sometimes. So I don't know what was the intention behind this experiment, but they wanted to figure out things about symbolic rewards, what they're calling awards here. They basically chose a random group of editors, and on a coin toss, they split them in two, and on a coin toss, they gave some of them, and these were all good editors. So first of all, they were all already doing a really good job. They took this group, they split them in two, and on a coin toss, they gave some of them a very high star rating. Was it 4 or 5 stars? I don't know. And the other group, they didn't give them anything. They didn't tell them anything at all. It turns out that the people that got the 5-star rating, their performance actually went up. They were already good and their performance went up. Whereas the control group, which was not given anything, was not told about it, was not given any stars, any rating, their performance remained the same. So it clearly showed that providing symbolic rewards can increase performance even in a work setting or in a professional setting. Very good. In contrast, these guys tried to gamify the sales team and the sales organization. This was another study where they took a bunch of salespeople and they tied the sales activity and sales performance to basketball. And they tied all the wins, the losses, the misses, like all of the stuff these sales guys were doing, they turned them into points, and then they put screens in the office and they visualized them and showed, like if a salesman had brought in a particular lead, it was called a this and a that. They subcategorized all the different kinds of accomplishments, and probably the big sales were called slam dunks or whatever. And they kind of like gamified the whole sales experience and attached rewards to it and attached like best player, blah, blah, blah. And something very interesting happened. A few people bought into this, and the people who brought into it, their performance went up and they really enjoyed they enjoyed the whole thing. Like they did well and they enjoyed the process of being gamified. But the other group, or rather other people, other salespeople, they who didn't feel a connection with this, their work performance actually went down, sales went down slightly, and overall job satisfaction and happiness at work really went down. Because they couldn't connect with this idea of, okay, so I think what happened here is this confusion between the goal and the reward got really messed up because they made it so complex and so rich. Actually, it became rather emotional. So if I tell you, the amount of time you spend on this course, let's all make you basketball players, and the amount of time you spend on this course will, get you either points. And if you don't spend enough time on this course, you'll be somewhere down the ladder, and the ones who send in more homework are suddenly, the winners, and there's the person of the tournament, and you can go forever into that sort of abstraction. But that's not necessarily motivating at all. It doesn't do the trick of moving you intrinsically, or moving you from extrinsic to intrinsic motivation through gamification. So especially in the workplace where where the goal is something else, where in this case the goal is sales, and the goal of sales supports further goals like career advancement, putting your kids through school, paying the mortgage, whatnot, other kinds of life goals. Gamifying it and attaching rewards very close to those goals, almost substituting rewards for goals, is a bad idea. And we need to be really careful actually with gamification. It's the one thing that it can be. I think the reason it's also come down in popularity is because probably a lot of people tried it and it didn't work out very good because they didn't really understand what they were doing. And it's just like 5-8 years later, it's like, oh, whatever. Yeah, so any questions so far? Any thoughts?
Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I was just wondering about that. How much competition was involved in that basketball work gamification thing? And also what culture it was, because there's a lot of differences in those.
Definitely.
Yeah.
The research itself, the paper is available online. I can link you to it. But clearly, sales cultures are always competitive. They're competitive, not necessarily in the nicest way. They can be very masculine. They can be very like in-group, out-group. They can be slight levels of bullying. All of that stuff goes on already in a sales culture. They're very driven, they're very loud. There's lots of out of workplace behavior that happens, which reinforces or has relationships with workplace behaviors. They go for drinks, they go for sports, whatever. So I can see how some people may have just felt terrible because they didn't do well, and it was really rubbed in their faces, for example. And this other disconnection between, what? I'm playing basketball? No, I'm not. I'm trying to sell something and go home. Don't confuse one with the other. It's a very different proposition from buy Starbucks and get stars and get rewards. That's cute. It's straightforward. So again, another thing I think is gamification needs to be kept really simple and made complex only very, very carefully for it to actually work. And it needs to be measured and iterated slowly. Jamie.
Adding to that, I listened to a really interesting conversation on Clubhouse recently, someone was talking about sales cultures and how specific they are, and kind of designing a system for that culture is like very specific to the culture and very nuanced. And like, for example, also the separation from the engineering culture, that's, that then like when you start to mix sales, the sales culture, like trying to combine them is like a mistake, and just like treat the salespeople like engineers is a mistake, and treating the engineers as salespeople.
You're talking about Ben Horowitz.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
I heard a Spotify talk of him interviewing a founder, and they had that exact same conversation of how hard it is for tech leaders to hire salespeople and why.
yes,
It's
exactly.
excellent. Yes.
Um, and adding to this gamification idea, on the like basketball, changing that, like conceptually, that it sounds good. Like it sounds like, this could increase competition and be very effective. The key piece that jumped out of my mind is buy-in into the system.
Yes.
If there were people that, if they were on board with it, like this could have been amazing, which it was for some people.
Yes.
But it needs adoption across the culture, and and who knows where that broke down. This could be maybe the rewards weren't good enough. That the incentives weren't tied into their performance. That's like, okay, they would have been more incentivized to like play this game, or it was like, otherwise it's just like a waste of their time. Why are we doing this? Like, we're here to make money, make more sales. And so
Exactly.
yeah, maybe they weren't getting enough, or maybe like some of them weren't basketball players, and like they didn't enjoy that.
Exactly. In fact, I think the conclusion from the paper was very much exactly what you said, is that the buy-in wasn't there for a good number of people. And obviously they directly didn't have any enjoyment, or it didn't enrich their workplace experience. And when you're not having fun and you have to meet goals, it's already a task, it further undermines your autonomy. So you see, that's why that control to autonomous motivation made continuum is so powerful, because always think about empowering users. How do you give them autonomy? How do you give them a feeling of agency? Because we love being agents where we choose voluntarily what the heck to do, whether it's work or pleasure, whatever. We like being in control. We like making choices. So, sorry, yeah.
One other thing, sorry, if I
Sure.
got one other thing to this motivation. In a conversation, someone was talking about motivating these their sales team, and creating a structure where they kind of gave them bigger incentives for selling customers like later, like so that there'd be like a big push of sales, and then they like drop off, they wouldn't follow up. So they incentivized like, say after like 2 weeks, like more closing these customers, from 2 weeks from the event. They'd have like an event, have like a bunch of sales, and so like they did this, and it worked for a while, and people were really motivated to kind of do this. They like increase the sales, and then leveled off, and they found out the salespeople started gaming the system, and when the event happened, they stopped selling them at the event, and they just purposely pushed off these sales to follow up with them 2 weeks later. So then they got and made the sale then to get their 20% bonus.
Absolutely.
And so their point is, that you create the system and the game and the rules, and people are going to find ways to circumvent that. Right?
Absolutely.
And
The first thing the player thinks is, how do you game the game, right?
Right.
That's the real fun.
Yeah.
It's like, you give me rules, right? Let's have some fun now. Yeah, right?
Yeah, right.
Especially if you try to do that in a non-autonomous sort of controlled situation where it's tied to your livelihood or your salary, you can turn people, you can make them pretty, reactant, and turn against the whole thing, for sure. Great, great conversation. So to quickly recap the first gamification strategy, we said, hey, create explicit and enjoyable rewards which support user goals, right? But not to confuse those two. The second one is this interesting one of turn the task into a journey, right? And this is where games really excel. Tasks and journeys are so different. Journeys are full of narrative, they're full of imagination, there's adventure, there's the unexpected, sense of the unknown. There's just so much when you try to when you think of this frame, the journey frame, rather than the task frame. So I'm going to show you a video to just immerse a little bit into what
The Level, a new video series in which I play excellent video game levels alongside the designers who made them. In this episode, I'm talking to Chris McEntee, who was a level designer on the Rayman games before becoming lead designer on Ori and the Will of the Wisps over at Moon Studios. For this video, we picked an area from Ori called the Windswept Wastes, which features a perilous climb up a mountain in the desert with crumbling platforms, the ability to dig through sand, giant laser beams, and a final escape from a monster worm. Chris was kind enough to share concept art, sketches, prototypes, and other behind-the-scenes goodies, and really go in depth into how a new ability is designed and how a level is built around it. So, without further ado, please sit back and enjoy this interview. So, like, where exactly did you start when you were making this area?
It was very much mechanics focused at first. When I first joined the team, one of my first tasks as a level designer was to come up with some interesting level design situations using these platforms that collapse when you stand on them, which actually are featured in the Windswept Wastes. But back then, it was just a very simple gameplay element, very basic prototype, and it's like, how can we use this in interesting ways? And so I did a bunch of sketches for how we could use these platforms. For example, I liked this one where it's sort of multi-use, right? So first you have to jump on the platform, don't touch the ground, then jump over again. And then when it comes back on the other side, you use it to then get up to somewhere higher. Or something like this where you have to force yourself to drop down, catch yourself after dropping, and then use a double jump to get out. And just playing with all kinds of different, just on paper, really, what would be interesting ways to use this gameplay element.
I think my favorite take on it is up here, where you have to intentionally break the platforms to guide this projectile across the room.
That's also, again, one of those it's one of the earliest blockouts that I did for this, because that's the kind of designer I am. I like to basically workshop. I take the elements that I have at my disposal, and then I just create as many unique scenarios that I can. I think you actually made a video about it, about workshopping and Mario Maker. The way that you sort of create interesting situations, you take the elements and you try to make interesting combinations of different things and create unique situations that exploit all of their unique traits and properties and all that kind of stuff. And so I was like, what would be an interesting way to flip the collapsing platform on its head? And well, what about if you have to intentionally make all of them disappear without touching the ground, so that way you can escort a projectile across?
So now in this room, we get the area's main new ability, the burrow. Tell me how that...
Right. So again, just a quick kind of immersion into how journeys kind of look like in games, and what we are kind of, what we're setting ourselves up for when you say, hey, turn a task into a journey. It's a significant sort of a challenge. And that's the part where most gamification, like books and papers and articles, they don't really have that much. Basically, they say, well, create intrinsic motivation and then kind of, create badges and leaderboards and stuff like that, and gamification will happen. And I think that also explains why the success of this field has been quite limited. So all of these interesting things which you do autonomously are sitting in this side of the continuum. And we looked at when you want to make tasks more sort of, you want to give them destinations, you can probably think of reward substitution. But then what about journeys? right? And to understand journeys, it is a creative process. Writing journeys is like writing scripts for film. It's a creative process, and I think at the core of it, what it means is that there are no principles for what makes a good journey, as in do this, do this, do this. There is no recipe for it. But in order to make a good journey, you need to understand the psychology of the user itself, right? And fundamentally, it's about understanding the user. It's about empowering the user and giving them challenges which are stimulating fundamentally, right? So there's a couple of dimensions to it. One is connecting with the identity of the user or the perceived identity and helping them unleash their creativity. And of course, every journey will be different depending on how you do it. But that's where we get into, well, we look at an example first, and then we look at self-determination theories. Right, that was a pretty well kind of popular gamification campaign. And the beauty about that thing, which I like very much, was just how much creativity, spontaneity, self-expression users and people showed for a journey that was so simple. And I think we can understand these journeys. I don't believe that I don't believe I understand it, or I can just kind of give you a recipe for journeys today. But I think just like filmmaking, storytelling, short story writing, what have you, game design, we can understand journeys by looking at really small ones to begin with, something like this, where a passerby, it's one simple trigger, there's a very clear goal, there's a very clear reward, and you're being asked to do a very simple behavior. But the emotional hook into the identity of the user is so strong, but yet it's very autonomous. It's very, it activates the autonomous motivation inside you. And you do things purely for the fun of it. Different people do it differently. There's enormous amount of creativity and innovation. And then you get that simple reward, which isn't even very healthy for you. But it works. It works really well, right? And I thought it was just a really good example of a journey. So what we are trying to do in some ways, this is a controversial slide, but I just wanted to show that in some ways your journey is also about how you build a pathway or a breadcrumb of those goals, which is your ultimate goal in some ways. Anyways, we can talk about this later. For example, here, when you see something like Mario, you see how you have a journey that's ongoing. My computer is frustratingly slow today. You have a journey that's ongoing, but the goal is always there. It's always up there. And I think some journeys that get just crazy long, like if you start reading the Game of Thrones or the Lord of the Rings or something, they are immense epic journeys, but the goal is really not very clear. And I think it can be alluring, just like when you start thinking like a filmmaker or a game designer or someone who writes narratives, novel writer. It could be alluring to get caught up in the woods and get really seduced by the possibilities of the journey. But somehow, if you don't, in gamification, if you don't keep the reward clear and upfront there, the user could get lost in the journey itself. And I think that may have also been the case with our sales and basketball sort of experiment, where I'm sure halfway through the thing, the sales guys were thinking, what are we doing here? What are we going after? More points, more slam dunks, you know? So journey design isn't easy, but definitely it leverages those characteristics. And that's why we get into self-determination theory. We want to get into understanding actually this phenomena called the user and the phenomena called intrinsic motivation itself. So these two guys, together with cognitive dissonance, this is the other theory in all of psychology, which I personally believe that this, together with cognitive dissonance, is the most powerful, are the two most powerful pillars. So I couldn't recommend this book and these authors and this whole idea of self-determination theory enough, because it is not present in behavioral economics. It is not present in, even though it's been around 50 years, it's not around enough at all. It is around in game design. You have game researchers talking about self-determination theory. And it's a clear departure from a lot of things, a lot of the more common ideas about psychology, which I will go into. But DC and Ryan, they've been working for 40 years on this. They've done a lot of research in a lot of different contexts. So one of the most replicated, highly validated, longitudinal, lots of different contexts, kind of really humble and sweet guys as well, who came up with this idea of intrinsic motivation. So this is from Amy Butcher's Engaged, where she has this great definition, where she says motivation can be defined as desire with velocity, right? You have desire, but you just have an aspiration, you just have a desire. I want to be rich, I want to be good at karate, but that's not motivation. You've got to pair that with momentum. When that desire builds into momentum, that state can be called a motivated state. And we were looking at amotivated to intrinsic motivation, the whole spectrum of that state, right? So it's like we've taken that one moment or that one state and we stretched it out with that diagram, which I showed you earlier. Just to remember, it's desire with velocity. This is from the book by the guys, by DC and Ryan, on intrinsic motivation and self-determination theory. So this is clear. This is the good stuff, very early in the book. So motivation theories basically fall along a descriptive continuum ranging from the mechanistic to the organismic, right? Mechanistic theories tend to view the human organism as passive, that is, as being pushed around by the interaction of physiological drives and environmental stimuli, whereas the organismic theories tend to view the organism as active, that is, being volitional and initiating behaviors. And that's really like a critical distinction, because on some level, if you think about what behavioral economics is trying to say, with the fact that you are biased, you need to be nudged, it's still a pretty mechanistic theory. And that's what Magda Osman also argues in The Psychology of Agency. Like anyone who's trying to study agency and empowerment mode. They're basically saying, we have these needs which push us to do behaviors. And in that sense, Maslow's hierarchy of needs is also an organismic theory. Whereas when you say, well, nudging is complex because you can have needs and you could be pushed to do behaviors, but then you may not be able to read the world correctly. You may be biased and therefore you need nudging. But in general, the BE side kind of gives you a sort of idea that you're not actually in control. You're just a system that has certain behavioral patterns, and you can make mistakes, you can screw up, and you need environments, you need external factors that help you navigate this sort of impulsive creature that you are. It's kind of like you're just being pushed by these drives. But an agent is someone who's conscious. An agent is someone who's aware. An agent who's someone who has volition, basically. So this is where SDT comes in and says, look, you are a self-determined being. And I think that's a massively important thing in all of psychology, because even if you go back to Freud, the early roots of psychology were all in drive theories, right? Basically, you all have these drives and you have this unconscious, basically, which is you have no control over it. This unconscious has all sorts of deep, dark things sitting there, which drives you to do stuff from, who you choose to marry to what profession you choose or whatever. You have personality is also very drive-based stuff, trait-based stuff. You are open, you are closed, you are neurotic, you are artistic. That's you, and you can't do much about it. You don't have much volition, much agency as an agent. You have to live it out. Whereas these guys are saying, no. You are a self-determined being. Your psychology is essentially your need for self-determination is at the core of who you are. Right? And let's listen to Dichi himself.
My name is Edward Deasy. I'm a motivational psychologist, and for the last 40 years or so, Richard Ryan and I have worked together to develop, test, refine, elaborate a theory of motivation, development, and wellness that we call self-determination theory. It is not only the two of us who've been working on it, of course. There are literally hundreds of psychologists from around the world who've participated in the process. Self-determination theory begins by making an important distinction. Most people who think about psychology think about it as a unitary concept. Namely, it's something that differs just in amount. How can I get someone more motivated to do something? How can I get that person less motivated to do something? The focus is always on amount. But from the beginning, Ryan and I have believed that it was important to think about types of motivation rather than the amount of motivation. Our primary distinction is between what we call autonomous motivation and controlled motivation. Autonomous motivation describes or names what you're doing when you're feeling a full sense of willingness, volition, and choice. Whatever the activity is, if you're doing it with a real sense of interest, enjoyment, and value, then it's likely that you're autonomously motivated. In contrast is controlled motivation. Controlled motivation refers to doing something in order to get some reward or to avoid some punishment. It means doing something because you're feeling pressured, demanded, obliged to be doing it. I think when most people think about motivation, they're more often thinking about controlled motivation than autonomous motivation. But we have found that when people are more autonomously motivated, the performance, their wellness, their engagement, all of those things are greater when you're autonomously motivated than when you're controlled in your motivation. So that's the first important distinction that we make in self-determination theory. The second important point is we believe that all human beings have a set of basic psychological needs. The needs that we believe are important are the need for competence, that is to say, to feel confident and effective in relation to whatever it is you're doing. Second, to feel relatedness, that is to say, to feel cared for by others, to care for others, to feel like you belong in various groups that are important to you. And the third need is autonomy. I've already said a bit about autonomy, but now I'm making the point that autonomy is actually a human need. And a human need is something that people must get satisfied for optimal wellness and optimal performance. If they don't get the need satisfied, then there will be negative psychological consequences that follow. The concept of psychological needs being universal is an important one because it's what lets us know and understand what it is that will promote autonomous motivation. When people feel competent, when they feel related to others, and when they're feeling a sense of volition, they will be autonomously motivated, and the positive consequences will follow from that. So the importance of this is that when you ask questions like, how do you promote effective motivation in the workplace or in schools or in healthcare clinics, wherever it is, whatever domain of life you're talking about, if you're interested in producing optimal outcomes, the way in which you can do that as a parent or a teacher or an employer, the way that you can do that is create the circumstances so that people who are learning or playing or performing for you so that they will be optimal in their outcomes. What you need to be doing is supporting their basic psychological needs.
Great.
Now, when it comes
Great. I can link that to you guys, and of course you can watch the whole thing. But there's another video here where it's just these three different dimensions of self-determination theory show up. I'll just quickly. Oh, this is the same as the previous. Sorry. Not. I think that was just beautifully said, because basically he's giving us the recipe for gamification right there. He's giving us the recipe for building the journey right there. Because if you do not have those three components, you don't have a sense of competence. You don't feel that you're good at this or you're getting better at it, which means there's a challenge dimension to it. It means there is a skill dimension to it, and there has to be a balance between the skill and the challenge. And if you don't feel like there is, like you have the freedom, the autonomy, to do it the way you want. You're not being pressured to do it. And you also need to feel socially related. Oh, sorry. Well, I don't need to show you the video because I'm speaking about it already, but this is what I'm talking about. So if you feel like you have the competence, but you have the autonomy, but then the third thing and the really important thing is this social relatedness, a sense of belonging, a sense of having a good, positive, enriching connection with others. Any of these is missing, you don't feel like a self-determined being. You lose your sense of agency, you lose your sense of joy, and what you're doing cannot be so intrinsically motivated anymore. Again, coming back to that basketball and sales example, clearly you can see how it could have gone wrong for some people on these parameters, like on relatedness. If you're not doing very well in the sales game, probably didn't have the greatest relationships and the greatest like connections at work. Definitely didn't feel autonomous because you were pretty much forced to either play this game or you're, what else can you do? It's what someone told you can do at work. And that opt-in, that buy-in, super important, what Jamie said. And then the competence itself, when it's turned into an outright competition, there are going to be winners and losers, and there's going to be some who lose really bad. So some people's sense of competence could have gotten better, but a lot of people would have felt really terrible in terms of their competence. So having these three is really important. I just wanted to show you like a weird gameplay from a very controversial game.
We are back with another episode of Before You Buy, that show where we give you some straight up gameplay and our first impressions of the latest games releasing. It's me, your guide, Jake Baldino, and today we're talking about Death Stranding. It feels like the wait for this one has been like incredibly long, but it was actually officially unveiled with a trailer at E3 2016. It might feel longer than that if you're the type to deeply follow game news, because as you know, legendary developer Hideo Kojima and his team behind the classic Metal Gear series had a very public breakup with their publisher Konami. Death Stranding in 2019 is Kojima Productions' unshackled grand vision. Their very hyped up, talked about, and divisive game. I can't wait to talk about this one, but before we get into it, two things. Number one, I specifically am showing only early parts of the game in this footage on PS4 Pro here because I think the journey is worth discovering yourself, and people are really sensitive to spoilers. Some of this gameplay might come off pretty dull, but it's the moment-to-moment gameplay unfiltered. If I show anything later in the game, it's only to give you a glimpse of other mechanics that, frankly, I don't think marketing or even some other reviews demonstrated that much, but yeah, no spoilers. And the second thing, as many of you guys know, if you watch a lot, I, Jake, am the official GameRanks Kojima fanboy. So I want you to know that. I'm predisposed to liking this game, gonna be totally honest. But I figured many of you are probably in the same boat anyway. You know, Metal Gear was a popular series. Anyways, I do like this game. I mostly love it, in fact. I think some of you guys might give me shit for that. But really, I'm also not gonna pull the wool over your eyes and sell you on something that you just may not like. There is some stuff in this game that some people will want to take on and others will find a complete waste of time. I'll try to dissect all that as we go through. So anyways, you play as Sam Porter Bridges, portrayed by Boondock Saints actor Norman Reedus. You are in a post-apocalyptic America suffering from the Death Stranding. It's sort of like a, you know, first considered like kind of like the next big bang, but in affecting the way humans die, the afterlife, and seemingly the passage of time itself. Timefall is a rain that everyone needs to avoid because if it gets on your skin, it ages you rapidly. Corpses can essentially become ticking time bombs. There's another place you can go to called a beach. To be honest, I'm keeping it really light here because it gets insanely overly complicated very fast. But as it goes on, you can sort of get a decent understanding of what's going on. But to get down to simple again, you play as Sam, who is a delivery man. In this world, physical goods still need to be transported the old-fashioned way, as most people live in bunkers underground. So it's up to you to take packages Pile them up on your back, strap them on your arms and your legs and around your waist, and venture across large, dangerous stretches of land to give a package to a person. Sometimes it's dumb stuff for side quests, like, you know, a pile of photographs or pizza or whatever. Other times it's vital supplies like meds for survival or just stuff to progress the story. Now, completing these deliveries gets you a rating, and you increase an arbitrary ranking, slowly being able to carry more, as well as getting better equipment for venturing out in the world and making your life a little easier. Get a little portable cart to drag along with you to bring more packages, exoskeletons to help you with traversal, tools, weapons, more as you go, and basically that's the core loop here. It gets more complicated as you play, but it is in some ways a high-end, super expensive AAA walking simulator. I don't mean that in a reductive
High-end AAA walking simulator. I have a friend who played this game obsessively for dozens and dozens of hours. First of all, this video is shit, it's YouTube. If you see that game on a big screen television, 4K, and the real thing from a PS, oh my God, this is just gorgeous. It's just gorgeous. You can just look at it, it's mesmeric. And like he said, as you play it, you get an idea of what is going on, but actually no one really is able to tell you what exactly is going on. Unlike a lot of games with clear goals, and if you think of the traditional games of, you know, Mario or whatever, or racing games, you have a finish line. This is just wandering, and your only task is to deliver these packages in this post-apocalyptic world to strange people. But people can't stop playing it. The journey is so interesting that it's just super immersive. Of course, you have critics as well. So it's one of those games that was highly anticipated, and a lot of people hated it as well. And there are very critical videos. But I happen to know people who just love it, and I can see why. And I think it's a classic kind of example of the journey that we're talking about in its most extreme form, where really the goal itself stops to become interesting and the journey really takes over. And that's why we get into flow states, which is my last conceptual piece for today. I'm not sure how many of you guys have heard of this, but I think understanding flow states is kind of super important for just behavior design in general, and just for life in general. I think this is the stuff of life. And it was this dude with the Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who I don't know where he's from exactly. I asked a friend to pronounce the name for me, and my friend is Polish, and he said that's not a Polish name either, so I have to look it up. But he was in the World War, and he's got excellent talks. He grew up during Second World War, and he thought about what makes people happy, really. And he developed the idea of flow and flow states. And it's kind of been documented elsewhere as well, but really this journey, this flow, these are some of the characteristics of it. Complete concentration, clarity of goals and reward in mind, and immediate feedback. You see that loop between reward and feedback is really important. Time is just kind of transforms, it slows up, speeds down, vanishes. The experience is very intrinsically rewarding. It's effortless and easy. There is a balance between challenges and skills, right? Action and awareness are merged, losing self-conscious rumination. And there's a feeling of control over the task. You see a lot of the things we touched on today are here. You're really doing it for the joy of it. You are in control, but you are challenged a little bit because there is an element of challenge. It is pushing your sense of competence. It is pushing your sense of autonomy. And definitely, if you put in a social dimension there, you also have relatedness. And people can spend hours in this state of flow to the point where, in fact, it's also leveraged in a negative way, where in this book, Addiction by Design, which focuses purely on the design of slot machines, Natasha Dow, she basically documents a very similar state of flow, where this state of addiction with a slot machine is basically these people who are in the zone where they don't even care about winning anymore. They take food with them. They take ways to you know yeah, they find ways to kind of avoid going to the toilet, avoid smoking, and just sit for hours at the slot machine. And actually, even when they win, they just continue playing because what they want is to be in the zone. And it's the goals of that and the way it's designed is just terrible. But you are in that zone, and interestingly, it seems like game players, painters, a lot of immersion, full immersion can happen and be in the zone. So quick example to end with, this is a screenshot from the new email app called Superhuman, which you should look up again and watch some of the videos and stuff. But basically, they're trying to make email much faster, and they're applying game design principles to it, where of course they're trying to get you to learn a lot of shortcuts and kind of master email. But I think they're doing a really interesting kind of a job. It's an interesting kind of a company which needs to be looked at. But the whole goal of these guys, as they say it, is to try to get you into a flow state, especially for people who have lots and lots of emails. So these are some points about the journey there. Did you guys have any thoughts on all this so far?
Jamie and I have played Death Standing. Stranding.
Stranding you have? Oh, nice. How long?
We started it, and it is beautiful, and also very complex and confusing. Part of it, I guess, adding to the journey part of it, it's sort of unfolding what's the next piece of it. Like first you're kind of going into it, you're like, what the hell is going on? Like, in this world, like, strange things are happening, and like it just gets progressively like more and more weird. And so
very weird.
So it's like your goal is just like, initially your goal is just to be like, figure out what the hell is happening in this world.
Yeah, I feel like it's engaging because the storyline is just really weird, and I feel like the storyline is what like keeps people going, because they want to know, they want to understand like the storyline. Like, just like if you're watching a TV show and it's really confusing on the first episodes, and like over time it unveils the true storyline.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would counter what this guy was saying in the video, that there is no goal. Like, well, and I'd say that there is a goal. Like, it's it's a very simple one. It's a low level goal, but it's deliver this package from point A to point B.
I guess I'm interested in your take on what are the rewards you experience along the way in this journey.
Yeah.
How?
So I think discovery is a big element of that, and novelty. As you start seeing what's next, how do you, what's coming next, and how do I unlock what's coming next?
And you're picking up things on the ground, like as you take the package from point A to point B, you're managing your health, so you have to like pick up stuff on the ground that you find to maintain your health to get to the next point.
Yeah, so an element of ownership, and you're kind of collecting things, and you're getting rewarded based on you're getting currency, and based on the packages that you deliver, you're getting like graded on them, which what wasn't a motivator for us. We didn't get that that far. That's like a further level on top of, after you do the basic task, delivering the packages back and forth. But so there's like I guess lots of layers of motivation in here. And I'd say the biggest one driving us in the beginning is the novelty. It's the figuring out what's the next piece of the story. What happens? How does this make sense? Like, is this even connected? How is this going to be explained? And getting to that next scene, next piece of the story.
Wow, that's super interesting.
I noticed that in the video there were these like ladders that had people's names on them and some like thumbs up and stuff. Is that like some kind of multiplayer feature, or like I'm just thinking about like related to this concept of relatedness? Is there some kind of like way to communicate with other players or something, or?
Yeah, to be honest with you, we didn't get that far into, so couldn't tell you. Yeah, couldn't tell you one way or another.
So that's a great point, though, Tom, because if you think about it, an apocalyptic scenario is a desperate one, and the fundamental drive there is to relate with somebody, right? You're just alone, and the need for relatedness is what kind of, I think, would push the user on to go and find someone to deliver the package to, someone to connect with, someone to talk to, someone to be around. So I feel like the need for relatedness is just built into the architecture, the concept of the game itself. But clearly all those cues should be pretty rewarding along the way, to see maybe footprints, or to see like Jamie was here. It's like, oh damn, people, wow.
Yeah, I'm not sure that this is, if this is in the game or not. This this idea is a big one in the Souls game, Dark Souls, where it's like a very difficult. It's known for very mechanical, very difficult game to kind of play through, and when you die, you leave a blood stain that everyone's playing like by themselves, but then you can see where other people's blood stains are, like other players around the world. And so like by nature, like, and it's extremely helpful, because by nature of the game, like you're dying constantly, and like the penalties for death, like you lose your soul and all your stuff, and like you need to like go back there. So it's like super painful to die. And this element of social relatedness, like you're going through an area and you see like, oh, a whole bunch of people died over here, and they can like leave messages, with your like blood stain, with your body, to be like, watch out over here, there's somebody hiding around this corner. And like the first time you get saved by someone else, you're like, oh, okay, I want to pay this forward to like the next person, so they don't die like I did.
Reciprocity.
Yeah. Anyway, it's like a very powerful mechanic, very interesting. Like this. This type.
Yeah, I was just checking out some posters and it looks pretty dark. Dark Souls.
Yeah. Yeah.
I also think
gameplay of that, like breakdown, would be very interesting.
Yeah.
I also think for a lot of the new games, just as you said, Ashwin, it's just really like cinematic and like very, very well animated, and there's music that's like very well done. So I think just these minor sensory experience is just like keeps you there. You're like, oh, this is a nice place. I like this music. It's very soothing, and like we'll see where it goes.
Very visceral.
Yeah.
Indeed.
And in the back to Death Stranding, in the context of the Octalysis framework, the motivation is all across the board, starting with like meaning, like you're in the world and you're kind of being immersed in it, and like saving the world, like people's lives are in your hand. And it's like, which even puts like a ton of pressure on on you, like while you're playing, like, holy crap, like if I mess up, right, I'm gonna drop this body and it's gonna explode, and we're gonna die, and like,
Exactly.
yeah.
I'll quickly touch frameworks and you could continue with that point right on that screen. I think three things that we need to keep in mind. One is, of course, gamification is, if you look at Fogg's behavior model, again, gamification definitely helps to amplify ability, motivation, and move you. We've been talking about motivation this whole class, actually, so you can obviously see the direct relevance of motivation to this topic. And on the behavior canvas, on the behavior design canvas, you basically try to see that, for example, if you already have intrinsic motivation or deep motivation up here, then providing ability to do some behavior might be the more direct strategic route. But if you don't have that motivation in the first place, or amotivated or extrinsically motivated, then I guess again gamification strategies and tools can be applied here. And the old famous and classic, and I would say, actually I've reviewed it over and over across time, and I think it's really, really good actually, is this guy's, is Yukai Chu's actionable gamification framework, which looks something like this. This is a simpler version of it, and this is what Jamie was referring to right now. What I like about this framework more than anything else is that, yeah, you could add more elements in there. You could say, okay, there could be something more, but the fact that it's separated between white hat and black hat, or rather ethical, positive feeling forms of motivation, and the more negative techniques, that's pretty nice. And he already nailed that in 2015. So, and it's been very widely used. He runs a quite influential gamification company that has done lots and lots of projects and so on. But basically the framework is such that on the top half of this octagon, and octalysis comes from the word octagon and analysis, he just put it together and called it the octalysis framework. But really on the top, you look at, he's giving you all these positive drives, positive needs, which basically have a lot of resonance with self-determination theory, as we saw just now. Things like social influence, relatedness, empowerment, agency, control, self-efficacy, right? This one on top is really good. Epic meaning and calling, sort of purpose is very important. Accomplishment, competence, again, which we looked at. And then ownership, which Jamie brought up, which is again very much in the sort of, very connected to all of these other main drives. And on the bottom half, you have these sort of, push motivators, what we've been calling push motivators earlier in the course, but also things that are not very pleasant, but still drive you. Things like scarcity, things like avoidance, taxes, unpredictability, loss aversion, all of that stuff comes at the bottom. So what Yukai Chu did was, he not only created this framework, he also mapped out all these game techniques, specific, techniques which serve as a nice kind of, what would you call them? What's the word? They have it's a nice taxonomy, and a nice like collection of specific techniques that you can use mapped to each of those sides of the framework. Things like points, badges, leaderboards, symbols, they come here, the symbolic stuff we talked about. Progress bar, quest list, win prize, high five, level up, But then if you want to create ownership, you can leverage things like virtual goods, Scratch, avatars, DDD, and so on and so on and so on, right? And as you can see, he's talking about sunk costs and stuff like that back in 2015 already. So he's incorporated cognitive side, he's incorporated design, of course, but he's also incorporated behavioral economics. And I think this book is just a must buy and just has to sit on your shelf, because it's also great to read about each of those. I certainly haven't read all of them, but I think picking those up, thinking about intrinsic motivation, thinking of the journey and the destination, thinking about like goals, rewards, and then applying this, be very clear whether you're on the white hat, the more pleasurable side of things, or in the scarcity side of things. For example, all of the stuff Jamie was describing about the Dark Souls was very much on the black hat side of things. Doesn't sound very productive, and it doesn't feel like very positive, but it keeps you going, right? It drives you, and it's not like those things can't be used. I mean, there are horror movies, people watch all kinds of crazy, horrible, painful stuff and get really stimulated by it. But if you're trying to apply that to a work setting or an educational setting or to taking the COVID vaccine, that's the thing with gamification, is that we are trying to apply all of these things which you can easily pull off in a game, but you're trying to apply them to life, and you need to be really, really careful about what you're trying to do. So yeah, those were the three like really key frameworks, issues, and yeah, that's it. We're really done for this class. I just wanted to discuss one case here, looking at self-determination theory and looking at, of course, Jamie, if you want to say more about the octalysis, just go for it. But I just wanted to talk about one case here, which was Uber rewards. And let's see, I hope I got it here. So a key place to look at what's going on with gamification is with rewards connected to work, whether it's things like Upwork, whether it's things like all sorts of gig economy stuff like Uber and so on. Now, let's review this. The Uber Pro is a rewards program that recognizes outstanding drivers. Anyways, before I go here, does anybody want to talk about this framework? I'm so sorry, I just jumped past this. The Octalysis, which I think is the only book you need to buy on gamification. Buy that book, buy Self-Determination Theory, and you're sorted. and skip everyone else for the moment, really.
That's very true.
Mm-hmm.
By far the best.
There's so much stuff out there. I was Googling for gamification stuff, and I'm like, wow, it's just everyone's writing derived stuff of derived stuff of derived stuff, and throwing ideas out there, and it's very, very inaccurate.
Could you?
Can I go to the previous? Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah. How do you define left side and right side? Is there any like differentiation between them?
Sorry, I left and right side.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about that actually. I've only been looking at the white hat. I think the left and right are the personal and the social. So on the right is more the external dimension of relatedness and the connection between the individual and society, individual and others, and the left side is this very internal psychological world, things like ownership, accomplishment, mastery, and so on.
Okay, got it.
But there's also, that makes sense, but there's another concept in psychology of public victory and private victory. And I find that a little bit more like nuanced when it comes to this, because it comes down to the individual about what you consider victory for yourself and in public. So accomplishment is kind of like a slightly broad word. You could have public accomplishments and you could have private accomplishments. So for your whole life, if you have been struggling to get better with something, then that's your win. And it doesn't show to the external world, but it's a big reward for you. It's a big goal for you. But then you could have other accomplishments like which you want to display in public. So public and private victory is another way to look at it.
Okay.
Cool, great question, Iris.
Yeah, and
It's cool to know that it's almost 12 o'clock and you're sharp as ever. So I'm like really happy. Yeah, Jane.
And I wanted to add to this discussion about the black hat versus white hat.
Yeah.
That the black hat techniques aren't necessarily bad. It's not like a good and bad distinction.
Right.
But what you said, I think being very careful of it, because it's say like scarcity, for example. Scarcity is very effective. Like talk about sales and having a limited time offer, and there's only so many seats left, and you need to reserve your spots. Like that's extremely motivating.
Yes.
To motivate to action. And so so that's sort of like that's sort of the key benefit of it, and the cost is if you start using scarcity everywhere, like like this is like a primal state that's we need to be afraid and like quickly grab onto things, and it's like that's not a state you want to stay in or overuse too much.
Exactly. And I think that's a great point. And it's you can start to see how self-determination theory's three main values, which are competence, relatedness, autonomy, how they map onto this. Like it's like, how do you give people a sense of autonomy, competence, relatedness, all these empowering sorts of abilities, but then still challenge them enough using these black hat techniques to keep life exciting. Because like you said, scarcity when used right can be stimulating. Unpredictability is definitely stimulating. And like you said, the whole, Death Stranding experience, so much of it is just unpredictable. And then if there's a zombie coming after you, fine, there's also that avoidance that kicks in, or if you've invested something, there's a sunk cost and there's loss aversion. So clearly, and I think that's why flow becomes really important, because flow is the only theory that's talking about somehow balancing these skill and challenge parts. And I think just watch this guy's talks. His talks are excellent. I mean, all these old dudes, if anyone's above 60 and has done 40 years of research, just watch them if they're still around. Because I think one thing about today's world, today's instant medium and YouTube world, is we've forgotten the importance of wisdom over time and just how much weight, how dense it can get. And just people entering the industry and reading a few books and making their own videos, writing their own Medium pieces. I don't discourage that, but it's become, it's very different from having tried and researched stuff for 40, 30, 40, 50 years. And it just every word he speaks, like the way he approaches the topic in any interview, he just gets straight to the heart of things. And it's like, bam, like, okay, that's what you're talking about. And so this flow state is super interesting because he's saying you're engaged, you're challenged. There is even an element of danger. There's even that black hat vibe to the thing, in that, you're driven to protect, you're driven to conserve. It's not just all, sunshine and roses and chilling, but it's so engaging and yet it's empowering. And so somewhere between SDT and flow states, and I think the Octalysis framework is we have like the entire theoretical groundwork for gamification.
Yeah, I think that's a really good combination, because it's like the layers of them, like what's going on, and taking this self-determination theory and like keeping, say, the autonomy, is an important piece, a layer underneath everything, and then applied to the Octalysis framework. Like that doesn't mean there's no challenges, that there's no black hat techniques being used.
Right.
There's still the unpredictability of like of a
Mhm.
monster coming at you, like these terrain challenges, something else that comes that you need to respond to.
Right.
But you can keep your autonomy in how you respond to it.
Right. That's a great point, because one thing I didn't touch, but I've been thinking about is all these tasks, what I've been calling tasks, are inherently hard to do. Like we saw what it was like to do your taxes, right? Even if someone was guiding you, it's a pretty hard thing to do. So how do you add challenge to something that's already challenging? Are we talking about a different kind of challenge? You see, those are the places where gamification becomes very challenging and difficult and tricky, because in a game you could throw a monster at the user or a zombie, but if I'm doing my taxes, if I'm learning a language, how do I turn that into a challenge? Because learning a language is a challenge in the first place. So are you saying you need to reduce the level of challenge, or like not increase it, but kind of provide a new dimension of challenge? And so this becomes a very design question. I think it's very hard to kind of extrapolate principles at this level, but we'd have to look at the specific case and the specific intervention, the specific moment, and think about how things work. But that's a great point. I just want to end with this this quick review of Uber rewards, which I find fascinating actually. Uber Pro is a rewards program that recognizes outstanding drivers. So what they're trying to do to help you reach your goals. So it's something that recognizes outstanding drivers, it's like, whoa, we're going to recognize you and help you reach your goals. Very empowering to start off with, right? How it works. You earn points. This is all for a driver. Don't forget, it's not the customer. Drive with Uber to earn points. So first of all, you could be driving with Lyft, you could be driving with blah, blah. Most drivers have more than one. They drive for more than one company. So first thing, behavior change, learn to drive more with Uber. And the more you drive with us, you get points. Some trips may earn you more points than others. It's very unclear what, that depends on our algorithms. See more details in the driver app. Fine, but we can't tell you right now. Okay, this could be busy trips. These could be really downtown areas. It could be heavy traffic hours. You can guess that. Okay. Offer quality service. Now you need to drive with Uber, earn points. Then you need to offer quality service. So how is this, in addition to earning points, you must maintain certain ratings, right? So how are these ratings to be gotten? It has to be gotten by obviously customer feedback. So there's no way to measure if I've served a customer well or not unless the customer gives me explicit feedback, star ratings. So, and the requirements vary by region. So the second thing is offer quality service. And the third is get those rewards. Finally, the higher the status you earn, which is a combination of points and service, the more rewards you unlock. Your status is determined based on your points and quality ratings over a fixed 3-month period. This is very critical because let's say your reward ceiling, your point ceiling is 100 points for 3 months. Imagine how desperate you'll be on the last day or the last week if you're at 90 points and you're like 10 points to go this week, I've got to nail it, you see? So it's turning this whole activity, which was a few years ago, the behavior of driving, cab driving through Uber, which was, well, I get a cab, I get this app, I register with Uber, and if someone calls me, I go pick them up, I drop them, make some money. It was a very simple sort of a cognitive behavior when Uber first came out, when these services came out. Now they're becoming like some very like deeply designed games. Except tell me how much autonomy, how much competence, where do you see competence, where do you see relatedness? See, the autonomy is almost zilch. Like, of course you can determine how much you want to drive, but you don't have autonomy in the driving itself, or your autonomy is seriously compromised. Like if you just look at that Burning Man, rave that we looked at, if you look at that as like a great example of autonomies, you just went there and did it. The music was on, the moment the beat shifted, everyone started grooving and you're in it, right? Like this is, oh, I have points, I have to get And now relatedness, if you look at relatedness, it's like, okay, now I really want to make sure I get those points back from the customer. So my goal, which used to be customer service, is now replaced by the reward. And that's why, where was it that someone told me recently? Was it you, Tom, who told me that, or was it someone in some other part of the world where the drivers were, I think they reminded the customer 2 or 3 times, I will give you 5 stars, make sure you give me 5 stars too. Please, sir, give me 5 stars. And when you face that as a customer, your ride isn't very pleasurable. If this guy's bringing it up 2 or 3 times, it's almost sounding desperate and you're feeling awkward, and this whole relatedness that you have with them is feeling weird. So that's what these programs are driving these drivers to do, because yeah, that's what. So that was the analysis, and I just thought it would be just interesting to present this. Earn rewards faster, check the driver app, quality service. Now, if there's someone who's drunk, someone who's just a bit of an asshole, someone who's having a busy day like a customer, and they don't behave well, you still have to, be nice and try to deliver quality service. So that undermines your rights. It means that all sorts of like power positions get even more asymmetric, because the driver is simply trying to be nice and deliver quality service. So I find this whole thing to be very like, it looks superbly beautifully designed, but at the level of behavioral and gamification thinking, I think this has a lot of problems. But it's something we can analyze going down further and look at other cases as well. And so gamification, to summarize, is not games like we saw. We take all of those learnings from games, but the context we're thinking about are completely different. They're very serious, they're boring, they're hard. And many times they impact your life in very serious ways. It's not like games Death Stranding, where you can just leave and nothing's going to change. I mean, it's been a nice experience, and psychologically maybe it has some impacts, but if you're driving for your living, that's a freaking serious thing. So yeah, I would say like that was summarizing gamification, probably the most controversial and powerful, together with habit design, which we do next, but to kind of really get into understanding these things before we try to do anything too ambitious. All right.
This is a good example, I think, good illustration of these things it's like the tactics could work. This could be good to gamification, but also just slapping it on, giving some points and rewards, like, do people care about these rewards? Like, offer quality service, like, or what does that mean? Does that mean now, like, all right, now I just keep asking for 5-star reviews, and which decreases the quality of service?
How much service can you offer? I mean, you can open a door, you can offer a mask, a bottle of water. What more? Should I give them a massage? Or like, what are you talking about? It's just so arbitrary. Exactly. And the higher the status you earn, the more rewards you unlock. But what are those rewards exactly? Is it money? Is it a latte? Anyways, okay, guys, we're about. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
And then one last point about the example for doing your taxes, and adding a challenge to that, adding a monster. And in there where this sort of doesn't fit the context, just like slapping something in, where adding a monster in, another context, in say Death Stranding, is like super effective, at the right time. One would argue that doing your taxes is its own monster. So there's nothing that already has this scary, like, challenge, and it's an issue of competence that you don't need another like obstacle in your way to to do the taxes, and you're already kind of short on competence. And so it would be.
That's a great point. Like, that's a great point. Like, I mean, imagine if you could turn that into a story, into a metaphor, and say, let's kill the tax monster or something, you know? Yeah, align your inherent dislike for that activity and turn it into a journey. Align with it will immediately gives me a sense of autonomy. It gives me a sense of purpose. It gives me a mission, like, oh, I have to kill the tax monster. Great, tell me what I need to do now. I'm like, well, first you need to add these 3 things. And oh, you cut off the left foot of the tax monster. No, that's pretty, that's pretty gross, but you could kind of go about it in some way like that. But how far are tax service designers, like people who are designing tax systems and stuff, how far are they from these ideas, right? Really far.
Really far.
Really
These
far.
are up to the people.
Still at usability.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, it's still working on getting the usability right. So anyways, great conversation, guys. Thanks so much. Again and again, I'm finding like this, a lot of theory, and I'm just unable to like just spend more time in class just working on problems. But I think theory is important because then now we have a common understanding and we can always work on stuff.
Yeah, frameworks to understand everything and break it down through different lenses.
Great. Iris, are you going to sleep anytime soon, or are you going to go and probably do a little work or something?
You might be.
I know.
I will probably go to sleep very soon.
Okay. I know you sometimes work pretty late. What are you guys gonna up to?
Or she might be going to a rave after this.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It wasn't the lockdown. Go and just let loose some real intrinsic motivation.
It's locked down right now.
You guys in the US, what plans for the day?
Me.
Katie just made a face like.
Well, I think Jamie's doing taxes, so
Funny enough.
very ironic.
Monster fighting.
Yeah.
Fighting the real monster.
Got a monster to slay.
Makes zombies look like puppies. And Tom, how's it going?
Pretty good. It's kind of interesting. I did my master's thesis on like language learning games, so it's
oh wow,
interesting topic for me because I didn't actually even run across this gamification octalysis thing, but that would have been very useful, I think.
Yeah, I imagine it's just lost in the interwebs.
Yeah, but that yeah, I don't know how much we want to talk about this. Maybe I'll just like move it to the Slack channel because that whole kind of like language learning case itself is pretty interesting about how you match the game goals with your actual learning goals, and what kind of like detracts from your learning. If you like make it too much of a game, then it takes up all your time to just like be playing games and you're not actually learning anything. It's like an interesting kind of.
Exactly. And language is so abstract. And of course, Duolingo has a lot of has a lot of praise, but I wonder what you think about it, if it's done well.
Yeah, they do some things really well, but then in terms of actual learning, it's not that good actually. Like it's good for grinding vocabulary basically, but if you use it to teach you like actual active language use, it's not very effective. Like I don't know if you guys have ever used Duolingo.
Yeah, I have.
Have you tried to like take the full course in like Spanish and then go to Spain and see how you do?
See, that's the real journey. That's the real journey. That's a beautiful point, because like a lot of the behavioral interventions we do have to have impact in real life. They may happen on digital products, but the real impact is on is in the user's life. And if we don't take that into account, we probably don't end up with the best solutions.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because you can really motivate people to do something, but then if that thing, like even if they perceive it as useful, it might not actually be valuable in the end at all. So
Exactly. So that's a great point. Like of all Duolingo's super high valuation, all the capital they've raised, all the users they have, all the activity they have, all of the ARPU and retention, like how many of those users actually are people who go and use the language in a real context? Do we have any data on that? We don't know.
Yeah, I think this is a good conversation on the importance of the goal and kind of alignment with application, like building the competence.
Right.
But is it competence for a specific situation, for being in the country, that's something that's applicable, or is this something, that's just on the side, it's not really effective for that? That's
exactly.
yeah, is it competence in the game or application? Like, is it just gonna make you really good at killing that tax monster, but it's actually not gonna, your tax filing is gonna be, so.
Oops, someone's gonna call you like, hey.
Yeah, by the way, good luck with your taxes.
Thank you. I'll accept all the good luck and good vibes. Maybe help me level up.
Okay, guys, let's call it a day. It's been a great one. Thank you very much, and see you on Slack.
Yeah,
Get some rest.
I want to add that I'd be happy to. Would be really interested to keep chatting further about the language learning and.
Sure.
Yeah,
let's take this conversation absolutely onto Slack and actually look at some real examples and stuff like that. Please, let's do that in the gamification channel. It'll be awesome. Look forward to it as well.
Cool.
Thanks. Have a great day, night,
Yes,
Bye, guys.
evening.
Bye-bye.
Take care, guys. Good night.
Good day.